We are in a new era of college football, and that is putting it lightly. Next year, we're going to have conference realignment. We're going to have two basically super conferences in the Big Ten and the SEC. We're going to have a 12-team playoff. The transfer portal stuff is going absolutely nutty. So I wanted to ask you, what's your overall feeling about where we're going forward and how this is moving forward? Are there some things you would like to see change? Because I think when changes come, everyone's a little hesitant, but I also think people need to realize that a lot of these things probably will be tweaked in the near future, like whether it's moving the transfer sighting till after the bowl games so there's more focus on the bowl games and the college football playoff, and you don't have guys that are in the college football playoff having to transfer out. Because I think I think if there's one thing that I think is dumb about all this, and there's a lot of things people are going to disagree with, but the one thing that stood out to me is teams on college football playoff teams having to enter the transfer portal and no longer being a part of their team as they're going into one of the biggest, opportunities of their life, whether they're playing or whether they're not. It's still something that they'll never forget. And that's kind of robbed from them because they don't really have a choice. They have to go do what's best for them.
Yeah, I think one thing people need to understand that this is the wild, wild west of the NIL era. This is when there's no rules. Everybody's just, throwing money at players, and it is basically college football free agency. And it's not always going to be like this. There will be sanctions and laws and things passed that are going to limit things and kind of give it a structure. Hopefully it's a post NCAA world we live in, because that's a boneheaded organization, and that just shouldn't be. I'm going to go on a rant there. Back to college football. Yeah, I think that, there's obvious things that can be changed. And I can see it from both sides that, we're younger, so we're more, free and flexible in terms of change, where some of the older generations of college football kind of don't like it, especially with the new rivalry or the old rivalries maybe going away, losing a little bit of their luster and things like that. I could see it from both sides. And I think it's going to be a net positive, because you just look at some of the SEC games in general, and the Big Ten is like this. Some of the weekends of college football next year, you're going to be sitting from noon to 3:30 to 7:30, and you're going to have a primetime top 15 matchup every single week, top 25 matchup every single week. And that is absolutely, just stunning for a college football fan, nuts like us. So I think it's going to be a net positive, but I do, it does suck a little bit that some of the rivalries are going to lose their lusters. But in that same breath, new rivalries will be born, and some of the games that didn't mean as much are going to mean more because there's a 12-team playoff. So I think, with the bad, there's good, and overall, it will be a net positive for college football and its fans.
Yeah, I mean, from a fan perspective, I don't have too many complaints. Listen, I understand that the transfer portal for coaches and stuff like that must be a living hell. It's probably a living hell. I mean, this is already some of the hardest working men in America, and now they're having to work 10 times harder convincing guys to stay, going out there and recruiting on a totally separate trail. While now you have early signing day today, while the transfer portal is going on, who do you put more focus on, stuff like that? Like, I understand it is a complete it's a storm that I couldn't even understand. Like, it's got to be hell. And I understand why people like Nick Saban don't like it. But guess what? We're here. I do think relegations are coming in some form or fashion. I did like the idea of Chip Kelly that football should be separate. I don't think you should have these conferences like UCLA softball competing against Big Ten softball. What sense does that make? But football is a different sport. I mean, you're traveling across the country for 1 week or, a few times a year. There's only so many games, you're not playing several times a week. Basketball, stuff like that kind of seems a little bit ridiculous. I think that's a potential idea in the future that I like. But just from a strictly college football perspective, I think you hit it on the head. Some of the rivalries we're going to get, LSU, Texas, thinking from an LSU perspective. I mean, Georgia, Texas, like those are going to become absolutely massive games that you're going to get on a biannual or, once every couple of years. I think those are going to become huge games, massive rivalries, stuff like that. And maybe they see each other again in the college football playoffs, so they could see each other twice again. Maybe they see each other 3 times. They play in the SEC championship, and then they play in the college football championship. So there's going to be all sorts of rivalries. The kind of games we're going to get from week 1 to week whatever it is, 13, 14, 15, are going to be absolutely, from just a strictly fan perspective. I mean, the Saturdays are going to be just ridiculous. And I think the 12-team playoff is going to be awesome because it just gives everybody hope. It gives 20 to 25 teams hope for the entire length of the season that they could end up making the playoff. And I understand people are going to be like, oh, well, teams already get blown out. And yes, but teams already get blown out in a 14 playoff. If you make it a 16 playoff, teams are going to get it blown out in that too. So I don't think it hurts anybody to have 12 teams in. It's still going to be excited. Tell me as a college football fan, you wouldn't watch Louisville versus Ohio State. I don't really care. I'll watch that. That's 6. That's awesome. Or, whatever it is, I'm still going to watch all of these games, whether it's a blowout or whether it's not.
It's crazy that football fans are mad there will be more football games. I don't understand that logic where it's like, oh, I'm mad about the expansion because there's going to be more blowouts. Like, we just watched a national championship where Georgia won 65-7. Like, what does it matter that we expanded it to 12 playoffs? Because I think what's important is what you said. One word: hope. Hope drives everything in this business, sports in general. Fan bases could be the worst team one year, but they have hope in the offseason, free agency, in this sense, recruiting, signing day, transfer portal. It brings hope. And, the hope is now, instead of being one of the 4 teams, you could be one of the 12 teams where it's like, yeah, I see a lot of people taking about the big one or the big game this past year, Ohio State, Michigan. That game's going to lose a little bit of its luster. Yeah, that might be true, but also that game is going to, basically give one of those 2 teams a bye, which is extremely valuable in football, much more valuable than, say, baseball. And on top of that, the lesser games like Penn State playing those 2 games matters more now because Penn State's playing for one of those 12 spots. Or let's go to the SEC and we're talking about LSU versus Ole Miss. That game didn't really matter. It was always LSU versus Bama. Whoever wins that game is going to go to the SEC championship with the chance to go to the college football playoffs. Now, if LSU beats Ole Miss, whereas Ole Miss beat LSU this year, they're going to the playoff. That's,
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, a lot of people talk about the how sacred the college football season is, and you can't lose one game. Well, the reality of the situation is that the regular season is more meaningless than any other regular season, because if you do lose one game and you're in the ACC and you lose it early, let's say Florida State had lost to LSU, they still didn't get in. So they won all their games in the regular season. It didn't even matter. So how are you going to tell me from a Florida State perspective that the regular season is this sacred thing? Because they won every single damn game and they're still not in the playoff. And if they had lost one of those games early, they would have had no shot, and the rest of their regular season would have essentially been meaningless. So don't tell me that the regular season is this huge thing, all this stuff. No, now the regular season is going to mean a lot more, because a team that's 9-2 still has something to play for in the last week of the season. A team that's 9-3, and if they have Oklahoma or Texas or Alabama on their schedule, can hop into the playoffs. The regular season now means so much more than it did at any other point. So it's just the 3 or 4 teams that are complaining about this. Everyone else should be happy. Coming up after the break, we're going to get into some potential Falcons coaches if Arthur Smith is fired.